She was buried 10 years ago. I saw the coffin close with my own eyes. The words didn't sound real anymore, not even to Ethan Cole himself, as he stood at the rusted iron gate of the estate he had abandoned a decade ago, the wind brushing cold against his tailored coat, the air thick with the quiet weight of something unfinished. The house loomed ahead, 3 stories of stone and glass, once pristine, now worn by time. The windows dark except for one, just one, glowing faintly with a warm, steady light that should not have been there, not in a place no one had touched in years, not in a house that had been sealed with memory and regret. Ethan didn't move at first, his hand resting on the gate, fingers tightening slightly, as if testing whether this moment was solid or just another illusion his mind had conjured after too many sleepless nights. But the light didn't flicker, didn't fade, it stayed, quiet, alive. A slow breath left his chest as he pushed the gate open, the hinges groaning softly, the sound echoing across the empty driveway like something waking up, gravel crunching under his shoes as he walked forward, each step measured, controlled, the same precision that had built his empire now barely holding together the fracture inside him. 10 years ago, this house had been filled with laughter that didn't belong to him, warmth he never quite understood, a woman whose presence softened every room she entered, Naomi. Her name surfaced uninvited, sharp and clear, the way it always did when he allowed himself to remember, a memory he had, buried alongside her, or at least that's what he believed, what everyone had told him to believe. The front door stood slightly ajar, just enough to let a thin line of golden light spill into the darkness of the porch, and Ethan stopped again, closer now, close enough to hear something, soft, almost lost beneath the hum of the night, a sound that didn't belong in an empty house, a small voice, light, uncertain, carrying the fragile shape of a word that hit him harder than anything else ever. Could Mom? The air shifted, or maybe it was just his breath catching in his throat, but the world seemed to narrow into that single sound, that single impossible detail, his hand lifting slowly toward the door as if drawn by something deeper than logic, something older than doubt, and when his fingers finally touched the wood, it was warm, not cold like it should have been, not forgotten, not abandoned, alive. He pushed the door open just a few inches more, enough for the light to spill across his face, enough for the scent of something familiar, clean linen, faint lavender, to reach him like a memory that refused to stay buried. And for a moment, just one suspended moment, Ethan Cole, the man who controlled billion-dollar deals without hesitation, who never second-guessed a decision once made, stood completely still, because inside that house, behind that light, behind that voice, was a truth that should not exist, a truth that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew, everything he chose not to question. And as the silence stretched, heavy and absolute, one thought broke through, quiet but undeniable. If she was alive, then nothing about her death had ever been real. The door opened another inch, then another, the soft creak stretching into the quiet like a warning that something long buried was about to surface. And Ethan stepped inside, without realizing he had made the decision to cross that threshold, his polished shoes meeting the hardwood floor that still carried the faint sheen of care, not dust, not neglect, but care, as if someone had been living here not just days ago, but continuously, deliberately, and the realization pressed against his chest in a slow, tightening weight. The air was warmer inside, carrying that same trace of lavender and something else, something domestic, lived in, a quiet normalcy that did not belong in a place he had sealed away from the world. And as his eyes adjusted to the light, details began to emerge, subtle at first, then undeniable. A folded blanket draped neatly over the arm of the sofa. A pair of small sneakers placed by the base of the staircase, size too small to belong to any adult, positioned with care, toes aligned as if someone had been taught to keep things in order. Ethan's gaze lingered there longer than it should have, his mind refusing to complete the thought that was forming, but his body already reacting, his breath shallower now, each inhale deliberate, controlled, as if he could manage the truth by controlling the air he allowed in. A faint sound came again, clearer this time. The soft rhythm of movement upstairs, followed by that same voice, quieter now but unmistakable, a child's voice, steady, familiar in a way that did not make sense. "Mom, is someone here?" The word echoed through him. Not loud, not dramatic, but precise, like something aligning into place whether he was ready or not. And Ethan took a step forward, then another, his eyes moving across the living room, catching the edge of a photograph on the mantel that had not been there before, or perhaps had been replaced, and he found himself drawn to it, each step slower than the last, until he stood close enough to see it clearly. A simple frame, nothing expensive, nothing like what he used to surround himself with, and inside it, a picture that should not exist. Naomi standing in the soft light of what looked like the backyard, her expression calm, not the distant memory he carried, but real, present, her hair catching the sunlight, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of a boy who stood beside her, looking directly at the camera, a boy with features Ethan recognized before he could stop himself. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, a reflection not of who Ethan was now, but of who he had been before everything became calculated and cold. His hand lifted slightly, hovering near the frame but not touching it, as if contact would confirm something he was not yet ready to accept. And for a moment, the world narrowed again, not to a single sound this time, but to a single truth forming piece by piece in front of him, undeniable, irreversible. And then the floor above him creaked, a slow, deliberate step, followed by another, and Ethan's head lifted instinctively toward the staircase, his body going still, every instinct sharpening into focus, because whatever was coming down those steps was no longer a question of possibility, but of reality. And as the light from above shifted, stretching shadows along the wall, one thought settled into him with quiet certainty. He had not come back to an abandoned house. He had walked into a life that had continued without him. The first figure appeared at the top of the staircase slowly, not rushed, not startled, but composed in a way that made the moment feel even more unreal, and Ethan's breath stalled as his eyes locked onto the outline of a woman standing beneath the soft overhead light, her hand resting lightly on the wooden railing, her posture calm, steady, as if she had been expecting this exact moment to arrive. Naomi did not step back, did not hesitate. She simply stood there, looking down at him with a gaze that held no confusion, no fear, only a quiet recognition that settled into the room like something long overdue. And for a second that stretched far beyond time, neither of them spoke. The distance between them filled with 10 years of silence that now had nowhere left to hide. The boy appeared just behind her, smaller, half a step back, his hand brushing against the fabric of her sleeve as if anchoring himself to something safe. His eyes curious but cautious, studying the man at the bottom of the stairs without stepping forward. And Ethan felt it immediately, that unspoken boundary, the invisible line that defined who belonged and who did not. Naomi moved first, not quickly, not dramatically, just one step downward, then another, her bare feet quiet against the wood, each step measured, grounded, as if she had walked this staircase 1,000 times and had no intention of making this moment anything more than what it was, real. Ethan's mind searched for words, explanations, anything that could restore order to what he was seeing, but nothing came. The language he used in boardrooms, the certainty he carried in every negotiation, none of it belonged here. And when he finally spoke, his voice did not sound like his own, low, strained, almost unfamiliar. Naomi. Her name lingered in the air, fragile, incomplete, but she did not respond immediately, her eyes holding his with a steadiness that felt like truth itself, unshaken, undeniable. She reached the final step and stopped, leaving a careful distance between them, not out of fear, but out of clarity, as if she understood exactly how far apart they truly were. And the boy remained just behind her, his small fingers curling gently into the fabric at her side, his presence quiet but powerful, a living answer to questions Ethan had not yet dared to ask. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression soft but firm, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried none of the warmth he remembered, but none of the bitterness he expected either. It was something else entirely, something grounded, resolved. You came back. It was not a question, not an accusation, just a statement of fact, and that simplicity struck harder than anything else could have. Ethan took a step forward without realizing it, then stopped, the movement small but revealing. his eyes flickering briefly to the boy before returning to her, searching, piecing together what stood in front of him, the impossible made visible, and in that moment, he understood something he had avoided for years. This was not a miracle, not a coincidence, not something that had just happened. This was a life, built day by day, choice by choice. Without him, the silence stretched again, but it was no longer empty. It was full, heavy with truth, and as the light from above settled across the three of them, Ethan felt something shift inside him, not breaking, not collapsing, but opening, because standing in front of him was not the memory of a woman he had lost, but the reality of a woman who had lived, endured, and chosen to remain unseen. And for the first time since he stepped into that house, one question rose above all the others, clear and unavoidable, not how she was alive, but why he had been the one left in the dark. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like something settling into place after years of being held too tight. And Ethan felt it in the way Naomi stood in front of him, not defensive, not distant, but grounded in a reality he had never been part of, her presence steady in a way that made his own feel uncertain, almost misplaced. His eyes moved again, this time not avoiding it, not delaying it, but finally landing on the boy, really seeing him, the height that reached just below Naomi's shoulder, the quiet posture, the careful way he watched without stepping forward. And something deep inside Ethan responded before logic could interfere, a recognition that did not need confirmation, because it was already there, written in the small details he could not ignore. What is his name? The question left him softer than he intended, stripped of authority, stripped of control, and Naomi did not answer immediately, her gaze flickering briefly toward the boy, as if giving him space to exist in the moment without being defined by it, before returning to Ethan with that same calm clarity. Lucas, she said, her voice even, unhurried, as if the name itself carried no need for explanation, and yet it echoed through Ethan with a weight that settled into his chest, because it was not just a name, it was time, years, birthdays he had not seen, first words he had not heard, a life that had unfolded beyond his reach. Lucas shifted slightly behind Naomi, his hand tightening just a little against her sleeve, not out of fear, but out of awareness, the kind that came from understanding that this moment mattered, even if he did not fully know why, and Ethan noticed that too, the quiet strength in the child, the absence of confusion, as if this house, this life, had always been enough. Ethan took another step forward, slower this time, careful, his voice finding its way again, but carrying something different now, something closer to truth than certainty. He is my son. It was not a question, but it sounded like one, fragile, unfinished, and Naomi did not interrupt him, did not correct him, but she also did not confirm it in the way he expected. Instead, she held his gaze with that same unwavering steadiness, letting the weight of his own words settle where they needed to. He is my son, she replied quietly, and there was no hostility in it, no attempt to deny. But there was a boundary, clear and deliberate, one that Ethan felt immediately, not as rejection, but as reality, something he could not step around, could not negotiate away. The room seemed to grow smaller, not physically, but emotionally, the distance between them defined not by steps, but by everything that had happened in the years between, and Ethan's mind moved quickly now, searching, reconstructing, trying to understand what had been taken from him, or perhaps what he had allowed to be taken. Naomi, I was told you were gone. I was told. His voice faltered, the certainty unraveling as he spoke it aloud, because even as the words formed, they felt thinner, weaker, like something he had accepted without ever questioning. Naomi's expression did not change, but something in her eyes deepened, not anger, not pain, but a quiet acknowledgement of something that had already been understood long before this moment. You were told what was convenient, she said, her tone soft but firm, each word placed carefully, and you chose not to look beyond it. The truth did not arrive loudly. It did not demand attention. It simply existed between them, undeniable, and Ethan felt it settle into him, not as a shock, but as a realization that had been waiting all along, because standing there, in a house he had abandoned, in front of a woman he had believed was gone, beside a child who had grown without him, He understood something he had avoided for years. This was not just about what he had lost. It was about what he had failed to see. The words lingered long after Naomi finished speaking, not because they were loud, but because they carried a quiet precision that left no room for denial, and Ethan felt them settle into him in a way that no argument could undo. His mind instinctively reaching for something to push back with, some version of the past that would make this moment less absolute. But nothing came, because for the first time, the narrative he had lived by felt incomplete, and worse, it felt chosen. He exhaled. Slowly, his hand lifting slightly as if to steady himself against something unseen, his voice lower now, stripped of the confidence that once defined it. I did not know. I thought I was protecting what was left, the sentence trailing at the edges, uncertain, as if even he was beginning to hear the weakness inside it. And Naomi did not interrupt, did not challenge him directly. She simply listened, her stillness making his words clearer than they had ever been. You protected your version of the truth, she replied after a moment, her tone even, not sharp, not accusing, but firm in a way that left no space to escape it. Not the truth itself, and Ethan's gaze dropped briefly, the shift subtle but telling, because it was not just what she said, it was what he recognized within it, the decisions he had accepted without question, the voices he had trusted because they aligned with the world he understood. Behind her, Lucas shifted again, this time stepping just slightly to the side, enough for Ethan to see him more clearly, the boy's eyes steady, observant, not afraid, but not open either. And Ethan felt that distance more sharply than anything Naomi had said because it was not imposed, it was natural, built over years of absence he could not reclaim. Why stay here? Ethan asked, the question coming out more quietly than he expected, not demanding, but searching, and Naomi's gaze softened just slightly, not in sympathy, but in recognition of the weight behind it. Because this was the only place no one thought to look, she said, her eyes briefly moving around the room, taking in the space not as something abandoned, but as something reclaimed. And because here, I could raise him without someone deciding who he should be before he even had the chance to know himself. The words settled between them with a quiet finality, and Ethan understood immediately what she meant, not just in theory, but in memory, the conversations he had once dismissed, the concerns she had voiced that he had minimized, the subtle ways the world he came from had tried to define everything, including her. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in realization, his mind moving quickly now, connecting pieces that had never been placed together before. My father, he began, the name carrying more weight than he intended, and Naomi did not look surprised, did not look confused. She simply held his gaze, allowing him to reach the conclusion on his own, because it had always been there. He made sure it was easy for you not to question it, she said quietly, and the statement did not feel like an accusation. It felt like clarity, something that had existed long before this moment, and would exist long after. Ethan's shoulders lowered slightly, the tension shifting into something heavier, more grounded, as the truth settled into place, not as a sudden shock, but as something undeniable, something he could not reshape. And as he stood there, in the house he had once left behind, in front of the life that had continued without him, he felt the weight of a different kind of realization take hold, not just that he had been misled, but that he had allowed it, and that the cost of that choice was now standing in front of him, real, present, and no longer willing to be unseen. No one moved for a while, and the silence that filled the room was no longer tense, but heavy, like the air just before rain, thick with something waiting to fall. And Ethan felt it in the way his chest rose and fell slower now, his breath no longer sharp but measured, as if his body was adjusting to a truth his mind had not yet fully caught up to. Naomi did not step back, did not step closer. She simply remained where she was, grounded in a space she had built without him, and Lucas stayed beside her, not hiding, not retreating, just present, his small frame steady in a way that felt older than his years. Ethan's gaze drifted briefly to the window, where the faint reflection of the three of them appeared against the glass, distorted slightly by the dim light, and for a moment he saw it not as it was, but as it could have been, a family standing together in a home that had never been abandoned, a life that had never been interrupted, and the image lingered just long enough to settle into something deeper than regret, something quieter, more permanent. He exhaled slowly, his voice returning but softer now, stripped of the need to control the outcome. I would have come back if I knew. The words felt fragile even as he said them, not because they were untrue, but because they were incomplete, and Naomi's eyes held his with a calm understanding that made it clear she heard more than just what he said. You did know enough to ask, she replied gently, her tone not harsh, not distant, but firm in a way that left no room for illusion. But you chose not to, and the truth of it did not land like an accusation. It settled like a quiet fact, something that had been there all along, waiting for him to acknowledge it. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in recognition, his gaze lowering for a brief moment before lifting again, and this time, when he looked at Lucas, he did not look away. He allowed himself to see the child fully, the way his shoulders stood straight, the way his eyes held a quiet intelligence, the way he stayed close to Naomi without needing to be told, and something in that stillness spoke. Louder than anything else, it spoke of stability, of presence, of a life built with intention. The room felt warmer now, not in temperature, but in something less tangible, something carried in the small details, the soft hum of the house, the faint creak of wood settling, the quiet rhythm of three people sharing the same space for the first time in years, and Ethan realized that nothing about this moment required urgency, nothing demanded immediate resolution, because what stood between them was not something that could be fixed in a single conversation. Naomi shifted slightly, her hand resting gently against Lucas's shoulder, not holding him back, but grounding him, and her gaze softened just enough to acknowledge what this moment meant, not just for Ethan, but for all of them. We did not disappear, she said quietly, her voice steady. We just stopped being part of a world that never made room for us. And the words carried no bitterness, only clarity, a truth shaped by time and choice rather than reaction. Ethan felt something inside him settle, not resolved, not healed, but understood, and as he stood there, no longer trying to close the distance too quickly, no longer reaching for answers he was not ready to hold, he realized that the silence between them was no longer something to escape. It was something to listen to, because within it was everything he had missed, everything he had overlooked, and everything that would now require more than words to face. The truth did not arrive as a single revelation. It unfolded slowly in Ethan's mind, piece by piece, like a structure he had once trusted now revealing its cracks under a different light, and for the first time, he allowed himself to follow it all the way back, not just to the day Naomi was declared gone, but to the days before that, the conversations he had dismissed, the unease he had chosen to ignore, the subtle tension between Naomi and his family that he had explained away as misunderstanding instead of something deeper. His eyes shifted slightly, not away from her, but inward, as if he were seeing those moments again with a clarity he did not have then, and his voice, when it came, was quieter, more grounded. There were things I remember now, things that did not make sense. And Naomi did not interrupt. She simply watched him, allowing him to reach the truth without guiding him toward it, because this part was his to face. The night before before everything happened. He continued, his words slower. Now, deliberate. My father insisted on handling everything. The reports, the arrangements, even the investigation. He said it was to protect the family, to keep things controlled. The sentence lingered, and for the first time, Ethan heard it for what it was, not protection, but control, not care, but decision, and his breath tightened slightly as the realization deepened. Naomi's expression did not change, but there was something in her stillness that confirmed what he was beginning to understand, not through accusation, but through the absence of denial, and that absence spoke louder than anything else. You never saw me, she said quietly, not as a question, but as a truth placed gently between them. Not after that day, not at the hospital, not anywhere. And Ethan's eyes lifted sharply at that, because he had not questioned it then, had not asked why he had been kept at a distance, why everything had been handled without him, why closure had been presented instead of sought, and now, standing here, it felt less like something that had happened to him, and more like something he had allowed to happen because it was easier than resisting it. His shoulders lowered slightly, the weight shifting from confusion to something heavier, something closer to accountability. He told me it was already done. Ethan said, his voice steady but low, that there was nothing left to see. And as the words left him, he understood what they had truly meant. Not that there was nothing there, but that there was something he was not meant to see. Lucas watched quietly, his gaze moving between them, absorbing more than either of them said aloud. And Ethan noticed that too. The way the boy did not interrupt, did not question, but understood enough to remain still, and that understanding carried its own kind of strength. Naomi took a slow breath, her hand resting lightly against Lucas's shoulder again, grounding both of them in the moment. "I was not gone," she said, softly, her voice calm, unwavering. "I was removed," and the distinction settled into the room with a clarity that left no room for interpretation, because it reframed everything, not as loss, but as decision, not as tragedy, but as intention. Ethan's gaze held hers, no longer searching for contradiction, no longer resisting the truth forming in front of him. And in that moment, the final piece aligned, not as a dramatic shock, but as something inevitable, something that had always been there beneath the surface, waiting for him to look deeper. And as the silence returned, it was no longer uncertain, it was defined, shaped by a single realization that changed everything he thought he understood. This was never about a death he mourned. It was about a truth that had been hidden from him, and a choice he had made not to uncover it. The realization did not break him the way he expected. It did not shatter into anger or rise into something loud. Instead, it settled into him with a quiet weight that was far heavier than anything explosive, and Ethan stood there, looking at Naomi not as someone who had returned, but as someone who had endured, someone who had lived through decisions made without her, around her, about her, and had chosen not just to survive them, but to build something beyond them. His voice, when it came, carried none of the authority it once held, only a steady honesty that felt unfamiliar but necessary. "I should have looked deeper," he said, not as a defense, not as an excuse, but as an acknowledgement. And Naomi's eyes held his for a moment longer, not softening, not hardening, simply receiving the truth for what it was. Lucas shifted slightly at her side, his gaze still fixed on Ethan, not with hostility, but with a careful curiosity, as if trying to understand where this man fit in a story that had never included him before. And Ethan felt that distance again, but this time he did not try to close it. He allowed it to exist, because he understood now that it had been earned through absence, not imposed without reason. "You cannot undo what you chose not to see," Naomi said quietly, her voice calm, grounded in something deeper than emotion, something shaped by time and clarity. "But you can decide what you see now." And the words did not offer forgiveness, they offered direction. A path that did not erase the past, but did not trap him in it either. Ethan nodded slightly, the movement small but deliberate, his gaze lowering for a brief second before returning. And this time when he looked at Lucas, he did not search for resemblance. He did not try to claim anything. He simply saw him as he was, a child who had grown in a world built with care, with presence, with intention, and that understanding shifted something in him again, not into regret, but into responsibility. He took a slow step back, not retreating, but giving space, acknowledging the boundaries that had been set long before he arrived. And the house seemed to respond to that movement, the air easing slightly, the quiet settling into something more balanced, less strained. Naomi watched him, her expression unchanged but her presence steady. And for the first time since he had walked through the door, there was no tension in the space between them, only clarity, and that clarity carried its own kind of peace. Lucas glanced up at her briefly, then back at Ethan, his posture still calm, still observant. And though he said nothing, there was a shift there too, subtle but present, not acceptance, not rejection, but awareness. The beginning of something that had not existed before. Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath deeper than any he had taken since arriving. And in that moment, he understood that this was not a place he could reclaim, not a life he could step back into as if nothing had changed. This was something he had to approach differently, with patience, with humility, with the willingness to stand outside before being invited in. And as the silence returned once more, it no longer felt like something unresolved. It felt like something open, something waiting, not for him to take, but for him to earn. The moment did not end with words. It settled into something quieter, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood, and Ethan stood near the doorway now, not fully inside, not completely outside, positioned in that narrow space between what had been and what could still become, his presence no longer pressing forward, no longer trying to claim anything that had not been offered. The house felt different again, not because anything had changed physically, but because something within him had. The urgency replaced by a steadiness that felt unfamiliar but right. And as he glanced once more around the room, the details no longer felt like evidence of what he had missed. They felt like proof of what had been built, carefully, intentionally. Without him, Naomi remained where she was, her posture relaxed but grounded, her hand still, resting lightly against Lucas's shoulder, not holding him in place, but reminding him that he was not alone. And Lucas stood there quietly, his eyes still on Ethan, but no longer guarded in the same way. Something softer now, something more open, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of awareness that this moment mattered in a way he could not fully explain. Ethan's gaze met his for a brief second, and instead of looking away, he held it, not as a challenge, not as a claim, but as an acknowledgement, a silent recognition that he saw him, not as an extension of himself, but as his own person, shaped by a life he had not been part of, and that understanding carried more weight than any words could have. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, the faint sound brushing against the walls like a reminder that time had not stopped for any of them, that everything continued, whether they were ready for it or not. And Ethan felt that truth settle into him with a quiet clarity. This was not a moment that would resolve itself in a single night, not something that could be repaired with a single decision. This was something that would require presence, consistency, a willingness to stand in discomfort without turning away. He took one final step backward, his hand resting briefly against the edge of the door, the gesture simple but deliberate. And for a moment, he hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of recognition of what this step meant, not leaving, not abandoning, but choosing not to force his way into a space he had not yet earned. Naomi watched him without speaking, her expression unchanged but her eyes steady. And in that silence, there was something unspoken but understood, a boundary respected, a beginning acknowledged without being declared. Lucas shifted slightly, his fingers loosening from the fabric of Naomi's sleeve, just enough to show that something had changed, subtle but real, and Ethan noticed it, not as permission, not as invitation, but as possibility, something small, something fragile, but something that had not existed before. The door remained open as he stepped out onto the porch, the light from inside spilling gently into the night, not closing behind him, not shutting him out, just existing. And Ethan paused there for a brief second, looking back, not at the house itself, but at what it now represented, not loss, not mystery, but truth. And as he turned away, the quiet followed him, not empty, not cold, but full, carrying with it the weight of what had been revealed and the shape of what might still come. And inside, behind him, the light remained, steady, unchanged, illuminating a space that no longer needed to be hidden.